thing that has been in the news, which we're going to still discuss today, and we had a lengthy conversation on yesterday, is the issue of petroleum product availability, quality in the country. Well, the lower house of the chamber, they're also concerned about it. I remember that the lawmakers over the weekend went to Dangote refinery and did some checks there. That was the basis of our conversation yesterday. Well, after that yesterday, the Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, Honorable Benjamin Kalu, is asking the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, as well as the Standards Organization of Nigeria, to guarantee that PMS, petrol imported into the country, is rigorously tested in laboratories to meet standard sulfur and octane levels, talking about the quality of petroleum products in circulation in Nigeria.
Unavailability of crude oil feedstock for our downstream domestic refineries are of particular concern. The Nigerian Midstream Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority, Nmdpra, and the Standard Organizations of Nigeria, SON, must guarantee that all petrol imported into the country is rigorously tested in laboratories to meet the standard sulfur and octane levels.
So there you have it. It's becoming a growing concern for the lawmakers, for Nigerians. I mean, we had one of the officials of Dangote on the program yesterday, and he did cite something to say, why do you think that generators are not lasting as long as they should? Perhaps it's because of the quality of the petroleum product that is fed into it. But let's discuss more with Dr. Wisdom Enang. Dr. Wisdom Enang is an oil and gas expert, and he joins us right here in the studio. Dr. Enang, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
So it's becoming a common conversation now. It first started with Nmdpra accusing Dangote of supplying substandard products. And then on Sunday, the lawmakers got samples of products, petroleum products, on their way to Dangote refinery. When they got there, they did a test, and they saw that the sulfur content was even higher than what Dangote has, which is not supposed to be. Because I want to believe that these products are supposed to be tested before they get into Nigeria for use. And they also talked about flash point, which is supposed to be low, I believe, but we saw higher ones. So maybe you should help us understand the regulatory process to be sure that perhaps there's no weak point somewhere there.
All right, thank you very much. Typically, we find that imported products would have first the test done abroad, and then when they come in here, they're being tested again. But, part of the weakness that we do have is two things. The independence of the test itself, because you have a regulator, but before you can ascertain that, you've got that comfort in terms of the test results, you need to own that test. And once it's a third-party test, then you cannot take ownership of the test. The other thing is how comprehensive is the test itself. I'll take your mind back to January, February 2022, when we had the high levels of methanol in our fuel. And what happened is we had different parameters that we do test for, but methanol content wasn't one of them. And that way we had some group of companies take advantage of that gap and then bring in fuel that was quite high in methanol content. A number of people, including myself, did suffer engine breakdown as a result. So when we look at the regulatory side of things, it's not just the standards, it's also the enforcement of things. How confident are we in the enforcement? And with that comes, when you take ownership of the enforcement, you take ownership of the testing, it does allow you some position to be able to do some research and development. It does allow you to be able to, study what's going on in the country. What do we need to add? For example, if we had one back in 2022, we could have known that methanol, excess methanol was something to look out for. And so this would have been something to actually engineer into our test process. So the regulators are there, but just having the standards is not going to cut it. I think we need to own the test process itself and make sure that the other thing is the human factor. Because I tell people for anything to work, you have the equipment, you have the processes, and then you have the human factor that drives the equipment and the processes. So you need to make sure that the people that are supposed to do their work actually do the work. Because, I mean, there's also a possibility of allowing these products come through and then the results are all made up. There's also that possibility. We couldn't, write it off. So these are some of the concerns. Conspiracy, another major concern of that we end up having, products with very high level of impurities coming to Nigeria.
So I think you've mentioned like 3 or 4 points, but I'll start from where has been touched before, a point that has been touched before, which is the issue of the regulators having their laboratories. I think that could be a worrying factor, because is it so huge, expensive? Because if you're depending on a third party for your result, anything could go wrong in the chain.
Absolutely, and you're right. Anything could go wrong, and it is important for us to understand that petroleum is not just something we discovered just yesterday. It's been around for a number of years, and so these are things that we should have actually planned for, knowing that, of course, we had in mind to develop our downstream ultimately. So these are all, things that we had to plan for. The regulators, I don't know why they haven't been able to set up their labs as of the moment. And I think, even if you're using third parties, right, I think there needs to be a chain of checks and counter checks and surveillance checks to make sure that, that whole process, you have this confidence. I think there are reputable companies that actually do these tests. And, there's no problem with getting 2 or 3 and putting them in place and putting arrangements in place to make sure that those tests does happen. Because ultimately, when everything slips through the cracks, right, people tend to turn away from the technical side of things and tend to lean on the conspiracy theories that, okay, look, there's no way this could have passed through, but there's actually a way. If you don't own this test, you don't know what's going on, and you don't take it as part of your innovation process, because at the end of this innovation, you're looking at what concerns Nigeria, look at the peculiarity of the fuel imported into Nigeria, and you're looking at what to look out for. You're looking at those blind spots. Those are definitely things to look out for. So, the regulator really should, rise to the occasion and start building their own state-of-the-art facility. That's the only way they can assure Nigerians that they're actually doing the testing that needs to be done.
And I think the other worrying factor is the human factor, which we know it's like the beginning and the end, because even if you had a state-of-the-art facility and all of that, you still need humans to handle that. And even if we were using a third party, for that, if we had the right human beings with the right orientation,
absolutely,
I guess we would still not have a problem. But I think that's the human resources is the most difficult to manage.
It is the most difficult, but it's something that, I tell you what, you look at the IOCs, for example, right? They're using the same talent pool from the same Nigerians, but they run it in such a way that there's a very high level of discipline, and I'm using them as a classical example. I know some Nigerian companies also run their processes that way, but there should be a way of checking that human element, starting from, who are these people, what values do they stand for before you get them into positions, what are their antecedents. Those are things to look out for. I mean, it's a sort of an opaque indication of who they would be on the job anyway, but at least that's a starting point. But the thing is, when you throw competence out of the window, when you put in some sort of sentiments, and then when you look at other factors away from actually what value that person is bringing to the table, that's usually the problem. And that's the red flag that starts up, and then people ignore it, and all the way to when there's now a compromise that extends to the equipment and the processes, because the humans control this. So there are some red flags to look out for when putting people in those positions.
So I wonder if it's the issue of competence, because this same personnel, as you said, when they work with the IOCs, it's better, or if they're employed or they go outside the country, the attitude and everything changes. Perhaps it is the issue of consequences for actions.
Correct.
Perhaps that is what we should work on.
Correct. So I like to use the CSE model when I talk about these things. There's the causes, there's the actions, and the consequences, right? When you create a gap, in terms of competency, when you create a gap in your organizational value system, then there's bound to be the exploitation from the staff. It's a normal human attitude to go through the path of least resistance. And once that happens, you find out that, okay, there's going to be a compromise on the entire standards. There's going to be a compromise on the service delivery. And then, of course, the consequences are far-reaching because, I mean, when you talk about things like emissions, we're talking about people damaging their vehicles. None of these are covered under insurance, by the way. And then we're talking about people being exposed to, some sort of health risk. And none of these are things that really helpful to the human body. So I think ultimately the human factor, we need to have a mindset change. The organizational culture helps people to, reshape their mindset. And also, consequences is very important. And I say this, for example, if people see that people, even at the top, don't get away with things, it would automatically shape their discipline. But once you find out that you're in a parastatal, for example, things go on and no one is being punished for it, or no punitive actions or correctional actions are taken against people, then there's that chance that people just feel like there's nothing that's going to happen. The worst case that's going to happen, I'll be cautioned, or nothing at all is going to happen. There are no consequences. So these are all things that I think the regulators need to put in place, because ultimately, if we do not do it for ourselves as Nigerians, no one is going to do it for us. And it's sending a very wrong signal. The back and forth is sending a very wrong signal to the international community on our ability to cater for our own institution, for example, the Dangote, and for our ability to actually watch over ourselves in terms of the standard of products that we do accept into the country.
And isn't it funny that all of this started because the Nmdpra was alleging that the products from, at least the diesel from Dangote, is substandard, and then the lawmakers decided to do a test and discover that even the ones imported into the country has even more impurities than the accusation laid on Dangote. Does that give a kind of sentiment around the Dangote refinery? I thought it was for the good of the whole country.
The thing is, the Dangote refinery, it's sacrosanct that it's for the good of the country. And I think there was a timeline mismatch between what the Nmdpra was trying to say and the reality. So I'll take us back to March 2024. Before then, we had the standards 1,000 ppm for petrol and 3,000 ppm for diesel, right? And it was reviewed at that point that, okay, going forward, that all products should go 200 ppm and below, all petroleum products imported into Nigeria. So a couple of months ago. Now, when the Dangote refinery started up, it was going between 600 and 650. But this was before these regulations anyways. And then once you drop that ppm, the Dangote refinery is now doing, below around 70 at the moment. So the truth is, I don't think the Nmdpra chief had, caught up with some of the recent developments, because of course you started with 600 or 650, but then there's that drive towards reducing your ppm limits. And I don't think it was updated on that. But I think that has even opened up a more important thing to see that there are structural issues. Structural issues with the regulator itself, being able to have his own independent lab. Structural issues with how do we, despite all the standards, do we still allow substandard products to come in? I mean, we could say, well, the methanol one, there was a lack of comprehensiveness of the test, constituents that we're looking out for. But we still have fuel that has the same elements that we're looking out for, same constituents, but they're obviously in odds of about 4 or 5 times higher than the allowed limit. How exactly is this happening? So this has opened up a more interesting conversation, just beyond just looking at one particular person or one particular company for in this case. Indeed.
And we're happy there was a meeting yesterday, Dangote, NNPCL, and even I think the president was there. So we do hope that will bring succor, because as you said, what message are we sending to international investors if, as one of the officials said, a regulator is belittling, a product coming from from the country. But on the other hand, now, how do we move forward? The lawmakers have said there's going to be an investigation on the substandard products, petroleum products in the country, but we already have a chain, a structure that is supposed to take care of it. But how do we ensure that we're not just going around with circular or just having an interesting conversation? Afterwards, we are back to what we used to be.
Yeah, I think a number of things I would like to advise when we're looking at doing this sort of inquiry, right? I think there's need to name and shame, really. I think that's the way to go. The lawmakers, when we see the corporates, let's say as it is, let's say who they are, and let's say how they were able to get these products in. That's the first thing, because that sends a signal to the people that are perpetuating these activities that it is not acceptable. The second thing is, what are we going to do in the short term? Are we going to have a chain of different global labs come in and do the work for us? And how are we going to ensure that they're doing the right thing, well, whether in the sort of test that they're performing, or how well they are able to ensure that all products that come into the country do not evade their range of capture, that they're able to capture these products and then test them accordingly. And then in the long term, how are we going to build our own labs? How are we going to run them? Are we going to run it the NMPC, or are we going to run it under the regulator? Or is it going to be a separate firm altogether? What are we going to do? So there's going to be that conversation starting from the short term, turning out punitive actions, medium term, making sure that we look at who exactly and the expertise of the people that are doing the tests for us, and then the long term, looking at how we can build our own facilities.
Yeah, well, we do hope we start that journey early enough, because, I mean, going by everything that's been said, cars and equipment, generators are getting the reduced lifespan. Correct. Because of all of these impurities. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Wisdom Enang, for your time this morning.
Thank you. Deeply appreciate it.
All right, let's take a break now. When we come back, it's MPC decision day. I know inflation is still surging, so I don't think there's any hope of a cut in interest rates, even though the CBN governor promised that soon we will see that. But how soon? Let's take a break. We'll have that conversation afterwards.